G'day. This week on the other side, our roundtable on the Labor government's Economic Roundtable. Did you understand what all that was about? We'll try and get to the bottom of it. It was formerly known as the Productivity Roundtable till they realised nothing productive would probably come out of it. Well, it didn't. We'll be joined by other side regulars, Economist GENE TUNNY, researcher and head of the Australian Institute for Progress think tank Graham Young, and former Bloomberg editor and data analyst Dan Petrie to look at what the roundtable participants talked about doing, what they said they might do, what they actually might do, and what you should do to protect yourself from them, because it's time you got the other side of the story. G'day Orange, g'day Port Fairy, g'day Australia. This is episode 423 of The Other Side for the week commencing Friday, August 22, 2025. I'm Damien Curry. The Other Side's your deep dive on the important issues that matter in Australia and that affect us from around the world from a different non-left-wing perspective. Not a popular perspective in this very left-wing country of ours, I'll admit. And since the May election, I've just about given up any hope that we'll see any change for the better real soon. But hey, somebody's got to do it. We live in hope. I'm feeling extra pessimistic and cynical about our country's future this week, unfortunately, I hate to say. And it wasn't helped by listening to a bunch of people who've never run a business in their lives, most of them. Most who've never created a job for another Australian in their lives. They've never had to sit up at night wondering whether they'll meet payroll. They've never had to be accountable to the marketplace and face competition on a daily basis, sit around a table with only about half a dozen actual business people who know what they're talking about, and powwow for 3 days about economics, a subject that would challenge most of them at the best of times. Nope, we will get to that soon with our special roundtable of experts of our own in a moment, but that was not the worst thing that happened this week in our economy or for the productivity of our nation. The worst thing that happened was that on Monday, one of the highest courts in the land did something very unusual. It imposed a massive fine on an important publicly listed business, a fine that will be borne by the mums and dads shareholders and just about everyone who's got a super account in Australia, a fine that will be paid by the millions of Aussies who are customers of this particular business, which is bad enough in itself. But the most disturbing thing to me, and the most unusual thing of all, is that this fine won't be paid to the government to be used in paying for government services for all Australians. Nope. In this case, the judge has imposed the biggest fine ever on a corporation for an industrial relations breach and has directed that more than half of that fine be paid to a union. Here's how Channel 7 News reported it Monday.
Live now to our chief reporter, Chris Reeson, at the Federal Court in Sydney. Chris, good afternoon. It is a record-breaking fine.
It's an extraordinary sum delivered today by the Federal Court Judge, Justice Michael Lee, and does break all of the records, Tash. We haven't seen a fine like this in 120 years of industrial relations law.
That's 7 News' Chris Reeson reporting on the ruling as it happened on Monday. This is the Qantas case. It started during COVID when Qantas decided to sack 1,820 ground staff and outsource their jobs. A brutal move, and I'm not about to defend Qantas or the way that Alan Joyce chose to run it or how much he got paid for his efforts in any way, shape or form. Let me be very clear about that. But back in 2021, the federal court ruled that the outsourcing of the ground staff jobs was unlawful under the Fair Work Act. We could do a whole show on whether that initial ruling is right, is fair, is good economics and good for Australians more broadly. Should businesses have the right to hire and fire people, or do we owe workers a job? But that's a secondary issue for today. It's not what we're primarily focusing on today. Today we're assuming that the centre left-wing view of industrial relations is correct, that workers can't be fired purely for business reasons, and that in Australia businesses do have an obligation to staff, to keep them employed and pay them out very well if they're laid off. What we're mainly focusing on today is beyond all that. After that ruling in 2021, Qantas appealed to the High Court. They lost that appeal in 2023. And this week's ruling was to determine the penalty that they'd have to pay for their sins. And everyone knew it was going to be a record breaker.
$90 million fine. It's broken in two. $50 million will go straight to the union for leading this case. The judge, Justice Lee, saying that he wanted to send a message to corporate Australia. That gives this union a massive slush fund now, a massive fighting fund to take on other industrial relations causes. The lawyer for the union saying that this was a calculated and carefully calibrated union-busting opposition. It is one of the biggest wins for the unions in this country, not just for the aviation sector, Tash, but for unions across every sector.
That's how Channel 7's Chris Reason reported it outside the court on Monday. So a whopping $90 million fine, the biggest ever, and $50 million of that has got to be paid directly. It's been ordered by the judge. Michael Lee's in the news a lot, that judge. Ordered to be paid directly to the Transport Workers Union. The fine's not being paid to the government, as is usual practice in such cases, so that we all benefit communally from the money. Instead, the TWU will pocket a cool $50 million, and how the remaining $40 million will be allocated will be resolved at another hearing that's going to happen later this month, probably next week or later. The TWU won't be giving the money to the sacked workers, by the way. It won't be giving it to its own members as a fee rebate or anything like that. They're reported as saying that they intend to use the funds to, quote, further campaign for worker safety and conditions. Now, that's code for we're keeping it, right? Now, I need to be totally clear. There is nothing illegal in that. The question is only whether it's fair or whether it's moral or it's a good precedent for Australia. Under the Fair Work Act, a court is totally allowed to direct that some or all of a fine be paid to a particular organisation or person. But this isn't done very often, and it's usually limited to cases where the union incurred significant costs in running the litigation or where a breach was particularly serious. There's a couple of very important facts about this case that we all need to understand. Firstly, the legal fees of the union are going to be paid for by Qantas under the ruling on top of this fine, right? They've been ordered to pay the legal fees. Now, some of the media reports have estimated that to be around $30 million. We don't know exactly if that's right. So the fine isn't to cover the union's legal costs, okay? Secondly, Qantas has already compensated the affected workers, $120 million. If you divide $120 million by 1,820 sacked workers, the average is about $66,000. The actual amounts paid out to people, to individuals, varied between 30 and 100,000, depending on their individual circumstances, how long they've been working for, blah, blah, blah. And Qantas are not angels in all of this. They didn't set up that $120 million payout fund until after they lost the appeal in 2023. So we're not saying necessarily that, you know, Qantas did the right thing, but the courts essentially did agree that Qantas were using the COVID crisis, which nearly wiped out their business, to try to bust the union. And today we're not discussing, as I said, whether they had a right to bust the union. That's another story. Aussies are nice people. We value fairness very highly, to our own detriment economically at times. The Australian moral intuition is to just resort to the David and Goliath narrative that the poor worker has had to win against the big evil corporation. But we've got to ask ourselves, I think, has our moral compass become a little bit perverted? In summary, Qantas will be paying $120 million to the sacked workers, around 6 to 12 months pay each, $50 million fine paid to the TWU directly, $30 million estimated, we're not sure about that number, but that's what we think it is based on media reports, to the TWU's lawyers. There are also reports of them paying tens of millions to their own lawyers. And then there's the other $40 million of the fine as well, which we don't know who it's going to be paid to yet. So if you add all of that up, let's say we make the cost to their own lawyers about $30 million as well. You get around $250 to $280 million. Remember, in reality, you can't fine a business, so the cost ends up being carried by the Qantas users. That's passengers and people who rely on air freight for food and stuff, which is all Australians, and shareholders, which is most Aussies who've got super. You probably have some Qantas shares in the mix. So we pay all these crazy fines. So at the very least, it could be argued that they should be really going into the government's consolidated revenue to be used for all of us on government services. But nope. As we said, this time a whopping $50 million is going to go to one single union for it to use in future cases as it sees fit. Now, the Australian reported on Tuesday that unlawfully outsourcing 1,820 jobs has saved Qantas much more than it cost the airline. The article says Qantas's own calculations suggest the airline has already saved close to $500 million by outsourcing those jobs. But there's an unfortunate error of economic and business analysis here. Qantas hasn't saved $500 million. It's simply now not spending $500 million that it probably should never have been required to spend in the first place. In fact, and here's the rub, the very fact that it's reduced its ground staffing costs by around $500 million is actually a proof point, or could be, for how inefficient the original workers might have been in the first place. If a group of workers could be replaced by outsourced workers for $500 million less, you've got to ask just how inefficient was their productivity originally. Now, I'm not saying we know one way or the other. We don't. But you've got to ask the question. Which brings us back to the secondary point for today's discussion, that maybe, generally speaking, businesses should be allowed to sack highly inefficient workers. That not only should they be allowed to do so, but maybe they have a moral and ethical responsibility to shareholders and customers to do so. So have we got our moral compass in a twist here? Couldn't it be argued in a court of justice and morality, rather than Australian-style legality, that not sacking ground staff or employees in a case like this would be grossly negligent mismanagement, akin to stealing from the customers and shareholders on behalf of the business and the workers and the unions, and rewarding their inefficiency? In the Australia of the 20th century, the one I grew up in, where people respected the idea of personal integrity, a hard day's work for fair pay, and let free market competition have at least some bearing on the cost of labour, we might have even suggested that such workers were taking the proverbial. We'll never likely expunge the deeply ingrained stereotype of the poor exploited worker from our national psyche, or ever defeat the labour movement's powerful narrative cliche of the evil corporation ruthlessly cutting staff. And the way Qantas behaved here apparently wasn't the best and nicest of corporate behaviour, it seems. But the point is that now we have courts handing unions big fine money. Although, let's face it, very few Australians even see or care that at the end of the day, that actually translates to people's lost superannuation returns, or the airline passengers' higher fares, or higher freight costs being passed on to people at supermarket checkouts. But we should care about the message that a ruling like this could potentially send about how we value freedom and liberty in the marketplace, efficiency, reward for value delivered, and ultimately productivity, the value of productive work. I just hope we haven't created a moral hazard here that's leaving the union and labour movement saying, "Happy flying, suckers." We're very happy to announce a brand new sponsor for The Other Side. And remember that one of the best ways to support the show is to support our sponsors. SmartKits Australia is a leading supplier of prefabricated home improvement kits, so you can do it yourself, save money and hassle. SmartKits Australia is the easiest way to improve your home and build memories that last forever. Buy online, customize your way, get it built. That's the SmartKits way. Decks, patios, pergolas, flyover roofs, carports, and insulated roofing, all prefabricated, fully engineered, and delivered anywhere in Australia. You can choose from hundreds of pre-designed SmartKits on their website, or you can go custom with SmartKits' in-house design team. Every kit is engineered tough, packed smart, and delivered free anywhere in Australia. And don't worry if you're not so handy. If you need it installed, they can do that too. Their licensed builder network can get you started even faster. It's up to you. So save thousands on your own 100% Australian-made smart kit. Build your own outdoor lifestyles with SmartKits Australia. SmartKits.com.au, a proud sponsor of The Other Side. There's something seriously wrong with the criminal justice system in our country, and specifically New South Wales, in regard to young men being pursued through the courts by the Crown over sexual assault cases that are based on what would seem to often be pretty flimsy foundations. And something needs to be done about it before any more families suffer the hell of having a young son dragged through courts on charges as serious as rape for doing nothing legally wrong. no matter what we might think about the morality or quality of their behaviour generally. This story from the Sydney Morning Herald this week. A man cried and embraced his family as he was found not guilty of raping a University of Sydney student after a party at St Paul's College campus. Darcy Clinton had pleaded not guilty to having sexual intercourse without consent against the then 18-year-old complainant following a dress-up party at a university bar in late 2022. The Sydney Morning Herald reports that the trial heard that Clifton had attended the party at around 7:30 p.m. The complainant was deemed to be drunk and was refused attempts to buy more drinks, the court was told. She apparently left the party with her friends at around the same time as Clifton left the party with his mates. She and Clifton kissed on the university grounds before catching an Uber together back to his Rose Bay apartment where they had sex. Clifton's lawyer argued the woman was a, quote, mutual, active and agreeable participant, while the Crown prosecutor, that's the government's lawyer paid for by your tax dollars, said no, she was in the midst of, quote, an alcoholic blackout and was incapable of consenting. Now, the woman in this case earlier testified that she didn't remember the sexual encounter until later finding a video and audio recording of it saved on her phone. Clifton said the recordings were made consensually. Otherwise, why would they be on her phone? Also, not a bad idea for young men to protect themselves this way these days, perhaps. It's sad that we have to even be saying something like that, but it's actually arguably true in the reality of our modern society, and cases like this one do seem to prove it. Anyway, the Sydney Morning Herald story says the defence argued that the woman was not too drunk to consent, that CCTV footage of the pair walking from the university grounds to the Uber showed that she was, quote, actively and enthusiastically participating in the passionate kissing, that Clifton himself was also seen stumbling, and that their intoxication eased from then onwards. The report goes on to say that the video taken of their sexual act showed that she was smiling throughout and that the intercourse capture was not aggressive, hard or fast, unquote. Are we happy, folks, that our society's reached a point where courts are discussing the type of sex that two adults are having in their private homes to determine whether it was consensual or not? I mean, it's just my opinion, but it seems very Orwellian 1984 stuff to me. There's some things that we maybe just have to accept that we just can't police in our society. Maybe we need a law that says, once you enter that house, there's not much the law can do to help you because the law can simply never really know what goes on. I mean, it's actually very possible that if this kid had not filmed this sex act, and God knows why they did, who knows, he could be actually spending the next 5 to 10 years in jail with his entire future ruined. Now, I know rape can occur after a drunk girl goes home with a guy and gets into his bed. But really, at that point, can we police it without it becoming just way too dangerous, that false accusation based on nothing more than moral remorse the day after, and I'm not saying that took place in this case, but something like that could happen a significant amount of time, and that would put all of our sons at very grave risk? That is the question that we need to be asking ourselves as a society. But back to the Sydney Morning Herald story. Clifton's lawyer testified that it'd be a strange thing for him to make the recordings and leave them on the woman's phone if she wasn't consenting. Okay, now I want you to imagine for a minute that this guy's your son. He's 22 years old. The whole family's endured this since the charges were first brought. It's been 2 years of hell. You've had to sit through a trial with 2 weeks' worth of evidence. And so as I read the next bit of the newspaper story, just imagine you're the mum or dad or the sister or brother of this guy. The 12-person jury retired at about 12 p.m. on August 13 to deliberate and delivered 2 notes to the judge in the following days, expressing that they'd been unable to reach a verdict. Judge Jenny Girdham first gave a direction to them, saying the jury should continue deliberating, and a second direction on Tuesday afternoon to try to reach a majority verdict, which would require 11 of the 12 jurors to reach a unanimous decision, the Sydney Morning Herald reports. They returned their not guilty verdict at about 12 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, the 20th, which was this past Wednesday, which is a week later. The Sydney Morning Herald story goes on. During its closing remarks on Wednesday, the judge told the parties, "We have a note and we have a verdict. Clifton breathed slowly and deeply, occasionally closing his eyes as he waited for the jury to walk in. When the jurors said not guilty to the judge's associate, he moved his head back and looked up, while his supporters in the public gallery became emotional. As Clifton was told he was free to go by the judge, he walked over to his family and embraced them. His mother put her hands in the seat in front of her, bowed her head, and was comforted by her husband. His family hugged him and wept. I really think we've got to ask ourselves, how does a case like this even get to court? How could there have ever been enough prima facie evidence in this case for it to proceed unless there was perhaps a sense of ideological activism happening somewhere within the New South Wales public service? It's fair to just ask that question, I think. And do we want our tax dollars being used in this manner in Australia? I know a lot's already been written about the problems within the system in that state, in newspapers like The Australian and others. We do need, of course, to protect young women from actual rapists, but we've also got to protect young men and their families from tortuous legal processes like this. We really haven't got the balance right as a country yet, but we need to be able to have this discussion, and we need to have it. The injustice is real. It is happening. And even in cases where, thank God, his family are spared any future hell with an erroneous guilty verdict and years of unjust imprisonment, they've already paid the massive price of years of hell in a system where the slow, expensive and arduous process is the punishment, you could argue. And it's got to stop. If you like The Other Side, one of the best ways you can support us is by signing up for the products of our sponsors. And one of our best sponsors is PIA VPN, the virtual private network that stops people spying on your internet activity. It'll keep you and your family truly safe from the prying eyes of big governments and corporations without slowing down your internet speeds. And you can watch Netflix or other streaming services using your regular accounts with them as if you're viewing from any country in the world. You can sign up for less than $3 a month and get a whopping 83% off the normal price. Just go to piavpn.com/otherside to sign up and you'll get the discount. And you'll get more info on those special deals if you check it out. That's piavpn.com/otherside. As economist Judith Sloan wrote this week for The Australian, it started off as a productivity roundtable, then it became a reform roundtable, then it went back to being a productivity roundtable for a bit, but it ended up as an economic reform roundtable. It's hard to have confidence in our government when it can't even decide what to call its economic gabfest, let alone hope that anything actually productive or beneficial is going to come out of it. Maybe it was because they realised that if they called it a productivity roundtable, the people of Australia would be entitled to expect that something actually productive might come out of it. But how can it when the right people aren't even in the room? There were 23 core participants and around 7 more joining in for bits of this 3-day talkfest. But only 6 of those 30 people were what you would call business leaders. The rest were from government, from regulatory bodies, public servants, union leaders, advocacy groups, and expert advisors. How can you have a powerful and effective meeting about the economy and job creation and building Australia's business base and improving productivity with only half a dozen business people in the room? To take a look at what's been discussed and what's come out of the meeting, we've got our own roundtable on the roundtable. I'm joined by Other Side regulars, Economist GENE TUNNY, researcher and head of the Australian Institute for Progress think tank Graham Young, and former Bloomberg editor and data analyst Dan Petrie. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for joining us on The Other Side to discuss this exciting national event that we've had. And before we get into what you guys think came out of it or didn't come out of it, let's talk a little bit about what it actually was or what it was supposed to be, because it doesn't seem as though Albo and Chalmers were actually united just going into it on what it was supposed to be. Dan, any initial thoughts on that?
Well, the first thing that came out was, there's the obvious things which you have to touch, which they didn't want to touch. GST was the first one when Albanese says it hurts the poor.
Yep.
And the moment you rule things in and out, and I think Chalmers wanted to be more open, that basically said to me, and just like, I'm sorry, but the participants who are there, the ACTU, I mean, asking the unions to advise on productivity is, think of your favourite villain advising on the correct treatment of, a maligned group. But that's really what came out for me, this was a rehash of every productivity report and the bad ones, that we've seen in the last couple of decades. And like, the ideas were rehashes, which...
Well, look, I mean, Chalmers did a press conference, obviously, at the end of it on Thursday afternoon, and he sort of said, I'm going to list these 10 priority areas, and then I'm going to list these sort of quick wins we can have, but I'm not going to do anything with that. I don't want to offend any ministers, and it was very, very general. It sounded like he was repeating a lot of stuff.
Oh, I can tell you as a former journalist, and debatable how effective I was in that role, but the power of 3. You say 10 commandments, you lose people.
Yeah,
right?
So, it's bad messaging.
So the first thing they try to talk about tax, but the fact that they've already decided, no, we're not doing anything. So it's basically like the Ken Henry moment. The second thing they decided to say was, we need to standardise licences across the nation. Okay, great. So that the tradie from Victoria can move up to Queensland.
Yep.
Like they're not already doing anyway. I mean, why would you hang around in Victoria? The third final thing was, productivity. What is it? They can't even define what it is.
No, they don't. Was it Graham? Was it your view? Was it the wrong group of people around that table, or was it the wrong agenda, or was it worth doing?
So, roundtables and summits are generally something a government does in its first term. So, if you think about Bob Hawke, he had 2, but it was basically to get the economy going after the Fraser period. So to put his prices and incomes accord into effect, and then they argued about indirect taxation, and he was actually ineffective on that. You had that huge one with Kevin Rudd, 1,000 people. The fact that they're having this summit in their second term suggests that they don't have an agenda. The reason that they tend to have them in first terms is because, they want to set an agenda. They need a path forward. These guys don't have a path forward. In fact, the path forward, in the case of Australia, is the path backwards. Because if you want to restore productivity, you need to fix the labour market. And in their first term, they bent the labour market. You need electricity prices, you need power prices to be low. In their first term, and continuing on in their second term, they're making them higher. So for me, looking at it, it was just a form of treading water while trying to kid the public that they were going forward.
It's not also, wouldn't we be right to expect that basically a government should know what's going to create productivity and pull the right levers and just do it?
Well, I mean, you were talking about
show some leadership.
They had the right people in the room. You've got the right people in the room here. And if you gave us 3 days, we'd come out with a program that would actually increase productivity, because it's pretty obvious what needs to be done in a lot of areas.
Yes.
At least in general, the specifics might take a bit to work out.
Yeah.
And there were issues they didn't discuss, like immigration. That is a big drag on our productivity for reasons that might not be obvious. But one thing is that the immigrants aren't necessarily high value add immigrants. So they're not in the highly productive part of the economy. But they're also diverting resources away from the highly productive part of the economy. If you took the mining industry out of the Australian economy, our productivity would be a lot less than it is now, a lot worse. They're about 50% of any increase that we've had.
Yep.
And that's because they're an industry that uses huge amounts of capital, so they can pay people really well.
Yep.
The immigration that we're bringing in is diverting from mining, and it's bringing in the sort of labour that doesn't work that sort of capital equipment.
Well, you're not allowed to talk about immigration in Australia, otherwise you're a neo-Nazi immediately. There's no spectrum of views on that. It's just you're either all for immigration or you're a neo-Nazi. I think we're going to see that play out. Certainly seeing it playing out online in the debate around this August 31 proposed rallies and things that are maybe going to happen. Gene Tunnny, you're the economist in the room. Basic economics question for you. Productivity is important because it represents the real creation of value in our economy. It's the real, you can print all the money you like, you can move money around, you can change all the rules, but if we're not making stuff, doing stuff, building stuff, creating stuff, and we have low productivity, we can't have nice things no matter what you do with wages, because if you put wages up, there's no productivity, then your real wages are going down in actuality because inflation will occur, right?
Well, yes. I mean, we end up with inflation. This is the concern of the Reserve Bank. You may have heard Michelle Bullock last week after the interest rate decision, and I think that shocked a lot of people, where she was saying we have to revise down our our projected productivity growth rate for Australia, so how much more productive we get each year. And what that means is that the sustainable rate of growth, the speed limit that they talk about before we get inflation, that's lower. So
Did she put a number on it?
She did, but
The Productivity Commission, I think, put it at about 0.7.
that was, I think, something along those
0.7,
lines.
yeah.
Yeah. So, whereas when in the early 2000s, we were assuming in Treasury that productivity was running at 1.75% per annum. Well, then we kept having to revise it down in each of the intergenerational reports.
Gosh.
So I remember when I was there, we revised it down to 1.5 or so, but now it's much lower than that.
How does that compare with world standards?
Well, we've had this issue in other advanced economies too, but it's not just us. But I mean, other advanced economies have similar issues with over-regulation and large public sectors. So we probably don't necessarily want to compare ourselves, say, with those other sclerotic European economies and say, oh, everything's fine. I think we can do a lot better than that. But we've really got to address the heavy role of government in the economy. My colleague at Centre for Independent Studies, Robert Carleen, had a real banger of a report a couple of weeks ago on Leviathan on the Rampage. We're up at 39% of GDP, government spending to GDP. And I mean, we had a bit higher in COVID because of all the JobKeeper, but this is a record in the post-war period otherwise. And nearly half or over half of people, according to Robert's estimates, are getting their main income from the government. Right, so that's just terrible for productivity.
That's terrifying. That's a terrifying statistic. That
Yes.
scared me more than anything. It was that CIS report from
Yes.
Sydney, right?
Yes.
That more than half of Australians are getting their income from the government in some way, shape, or form. Our public service now, noticeably, there was not a lot of conversation about cutting the size of the public service or reducing the size of government. In fact, we seem to have gone back to we're stuck with this philosophy in the country of government can and should fix everything.
The other thing too, which this was not an issue at the election, and this is also not an issue, in the last few years, but we've stopped talking about small business as a jobs generator. That to me is frightening. So the idea of risking your own capital, which should be, the fundamental aim for many, to risk your own capital, to have a go in the economy, the fair go, that no longer exists. It's basically the risk is, why do that when I can go and turn up and work in government where the average wage, we're coming here from Queensland, is in excess of $100,000. That's across the public service. But the broader point being is that you have all these people clustering around your capital cities, along the east coast. Australia's not, for example, doesn't suffer from a shortage of land. It actually doesn't even suffer from a shortage of regional centres. But the fact of the matter is, when government is, the big honeypot, people are going to cluster around there, and that's why, like items such as tent cities and these, the visage of, a cost of living crisis is when it's the only game in town. If that's all you can do is work for government in whatever role it is, and that's not taking away from the important role of essential workers.
Yeah.
But the reality is the bureaucracy, it's a problem. I remember putting freedom of information requests in, what type of roles are there? And Graham raised the point about mining before. I mean, it is one of the fundamental sectors which pays its own way. And we find amazing ways to really hamstring that industry. So the broader point being, as we talk about people earning their living from government, what's also concerning is the number of bankruptcies in the small business sector, because it's too hard to get ahead. And why is it hard to get ahead in the private sector? Because of energy costs.
Well, looking at the 10 things, I mean, there are 2 lists of 10 things. There's sort of a list of general ideas and a list that they're going to follow up. And he was at pains not to upset any ministers. It was kind of like, we're going to do this. We're going to respect the ministers and talk to the ministers. And then there's a list of 10 things he thinks we can do pretty quickly and tick off. And I can't see anything here. I mean, there's general thematic talk about better regulation, tightening regulation, reducing red tape.
But this is classic Chalmers. I'm sorry to jump in, but he sounds great. He sounds so convincing, but the truth of the matter is he never talks.
I don't think he does.
But the thing is, he talks in generalities.
And waffle.
There's nothing specific about it. You can get up and say, we're going to do this and use the big words, but unless someone can actually hang on to what is actually going to change.
Well, he tries to be specific and says, we're going to do these 10 things straight away. And then it's still generalities. Like, there's still nothing on this list that I can say, okay, simplifying trade, having a tell us once regulation amendment to.
So
but
what?
it's all
So-
about changing government
so
systems and
Jim's-
processes.
so-
Nothing
so-
for small business, Dan. That's to your point.
So Jim's general 10 thematics. That's the up.
Well, it's 10 thematics and then 10 specifics that sound like thematics.
Yeah,
anyway,
well,
Graham.
he's Dr. Jim Chalmers, and that's how you get a PhD. Voluminous writing, has very little impact on anyone, and gets tucked away in the Fryer Library at University of Queensland for the rest of your life, and no one looks at it again.
And now he's the
hopefully.
treasurer of Australia.
So
And-
an interesting thing about size of government is at the same time you've got the round table going on, you've got the Commonwealth Bank, I think it was, talking about AI and how it's using it to reduce its workforce. They had a bit of a stoush with the union over it. AI was kind of vaguely discussed at this meeting. The unions were concerned that AI not destroy anyone's job and that they actually get the benefit of the AI. But we are
can I
moving
just-
into a world where we're going to need fewer and fewer people
Yes.
to do these sort of administrative things. 'Cause
Right.
one thing AI is very good at is form filling. You know, I got
Yeah,
to
yeah,
do
yeah,
my
yeah.
SMSF investment principles the other day. I
We
just
need
told
to-
it
we
what I
need to-
was doing and why I was doing this, and 10 seconds later it gave me a perfectly acceptable sheet which I can give to the auditor.
Yeah, it's
So there's a
amazing.
whole public servant that could be gone, virtually, probably a phalanx of public servants that could be gone.
But what are they going to
those sorts
do?
of-
Because we don't have that small business mentality,
Well,
that
they could-
innovation mentality, that, this is the
bump
problem.
up the vet sector and retrain them to drive dump trucks in central Queensland.
Yeah.
They'll make more
And we're
money,
talking about the
and we'll all
bureaucrat
make
public
more
servants,
money.
not the frontline public servants, by the way, not the cops and the teachers and the help bulb.
And none of whom are employed by the federal government anyway.
That's right. They're
And
all
that,
state.
was another thing lacking. The state governments weren't there. And
Yeah.
a lot of this service delivery, a lot of the productivity actually happens at the state government level.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a really bizarre thing, wasn't it? This, I mean, it's very strange, and it's a little surprised that not much has come out of it. And they've almost tried to perhaps kill it from a public relations point of view.
Well, potentially there are some interesting tax measures coming out of it. So we have to see what Chalmers develops, and he may have a conflict with Albanese. I mean, Chalmers is certainly trying to position himself as the next PM.
Yeah, it feels like there's a conflict going on already.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so I mean, Chalmers could have an opportunity to do something like Paul Keating and develop a significant tax package, but we have to wait and see just how much courage he has. But apparently, there are a lot of potentially controversial ideas raised in that room. Chris Richardson did a really interesting LinkedIn post last night where he's saying anyone in that room in the tax discussion that Chris was part of could generate 3 banner headlines that could kill off any tax reform coming out of the summit because the ideas were that controversial. And he's saying, well, I'm not going to reveal anything because I think the situation's very fragile, right?
So we don't know what those 3 banner
No, he
headlines
won't
are.
tell us. But
Could we
I
guess?
think we could imagine. I mean, it'll be things around superannuation, tax
GST.
concessions. I think they've been suggesting they'll do something with an EV tax. To have EV drivers. I don't think they'll touch GST. They might tighten up negative gearing, that sort of thing. I think they'll be looking along those lines.
All right, we'll hold that thought. We're going to come
Yeah.
back and talk about taxation a little bit later on, but we'll take a quick break and we'll come back with our round table on the round table here on the other side. A great way to support the other side is to support our sponsors like SmartKits Australia, the best supplier of do-it-yourself prefab home renovation kits. And it's not just carports. SmartKits do decks, patios and pergolas, flyover roofs and insulated roofing too. All prefabricated, fully engineered and delivered anywhere in Australia. And if you're not too handy, they'll install it for you too. Get onto it. smartkits.com.au.
You're watching The Other Side with Damien Coorey, Australia's best independent news commentary show, bringing you up to speed on the issues that matter most. Simply subscribe for free on YouTube by hitting the subscribe button and bell, so you'll be notified whenever we post anything. And to really stay in touch, check out our independent website at othersidetv.com.au. You can sign up for free there too, or join the exclusive side and help support our show for less than $5 a month. This is The Other Side.
Paul Cully wrote in The Australian this week that Australia now lives in a Labor ascendancy that will run at least until the early 2030s. And it's a time which will see economic policy completely re-engineered. Evolutionary change is coming, he says. And that this will be driven by modern Labor's values and what it thinks it can actually achieve politically in real terms. which, given its huge majority in the Parliament and control of the Senate with the Greens, would be probably a heck of a lot right now. Kelly says that while it's still a work in progress, the main elements of Labor's agenda seem to be as follows. A complete rejection of any industrial relations deregulation, so no freeing up things for business owners and bosses in the workplace. Little interest in any public sector spending restraint, so no government tightening its belt at all. So more tax will be needed as a result of that to address a decade of fiscal deficits. A more government-directed industry policy and a renewed emphasis on workforce skills. Greater interventions by the state in the economy, so more socialism and less liberalism. You can forget about more free and market forces-led economy. And enshrining the renewable energy transition as pivotal in reviving economic growth and productivity, not just a part of the mix, but pivotal to growth. There have been some very dumb ideas already floated at the Labor government's Economics Roundtable, previously known as the Productivity Roundtable. To take a look at some of them, we've got our own roundtable on the roundtable happening this week on The Other Side, and I'm joined by Other Side regulars, former Bloomberg editor and data analyst Dan Petrie, head of the Australia Institute for Progress think tank Graham Young, and economist GENE TUNNY. Gentlemen, welcome back. Paul Kelly says evolutionary change is coming, and Labor will be running things well into 2030. So this is a classical liberal economist's worst nightmare, isn't it, Graham?
I wouldn't have called it evolution.
Devolution?
Well, what we need is more devolution in the economy so that people who are close to the decisions that need to be made actually make them and are allowed to get on with things. So no, it won't be that either. It's reversion. I mean, all those things, if they're Labor values, they're like, remember that Sally Robbins, I think it was, who lay down in the middle of the Olympics and the racing team? That's what this government is. They're laying down. There is not a single thing there that I'd call a value. It's just laziness.
Yeah.
You know, we're not going to change a single thing. We don't want to work harder.
Okay, if you were running the show, GENE TUNNY, what would be your top three things to get productivity going in Australia right away?
Well, certainly.
Not to put you on the spot. Already.
Yes. I mean, this is why I'll never be elected, but we need to really significantly cut spending. We've got too many resources going into the government sector, into less productive activities, and that's increasing the tax burden on the rest of us. So we really need to get spending under control, cut taxes to incentivise work effort and incentivise investment. Secondly, we need to sort out the energy problem that we've got. This was one of the themes of, and not to necessarily politically endorse one side or the other. I was invited to Matt Canavan's roundtable, which was held on the Wednesday in the room above where the secret productivity roundtable was being held in the cabinet room below. And Matt invited people from the resources sector, from mining, from industry, and I was invited along with Gary Banks, David Pearl, a former assistant treasurer, Gary Banks, former head of the Productivity Commission, and there was general agreement that the big problems we've got are excessive government spending and very high energy costs. We see how much energy costs have spiked since we started this rollout of renewables without a balanced energy plan. So essentially we're going heavy on renewables when we have to have all of the additional storage. We need to rely more on gas to balance supply and demand at times when there's not enough energy, and we end up with these very high prices in wholesale market, which translate into higher retail prices.
Yeah,
so we've had this big shock which is affecting consumers and it's affecting industry. So we've got all of these refiners and smelters which are now needing bailouts from the government. We've got BHP and we've got big companies like that saying that they may have to cut jobs in Australia just because we're such a high cost jurisdiction. So we've really got to fix energy, and it's having a more balanced policy. It's removing the ban on nuclear power, so we can potentially have that as part of the mix, and it's about dialing down the commitment to this very strong, very fast rollout of renewables, which is just driving up costs and costing consumers and business.
Okay, and I couldn't agree more on all of that, and I think it's critical and important, and we've got to get onto it fast. Instead, what we have is this: the Productivity Commission itself, with its investing in cheaper, cleaner energy and the net zero transition report, proposing a classification of all 11 million homes in Australia according to their climate resilience. I mean, this is why are we getting stuff like this coming out of a productivity commission, let alone a productivity roundtable of mostly left-wing thinkers?
The headline's wrong. I mean, investing in cheaper electricity.
Yeah.
The prices are there. It's the input costs are incredibly high. Gene's point is the right one, and Graham's also touched on it as well. Like that cost input you've got being burdened by the private sector. The spending capacity, basically being that's crowding out everything else is the government. And I go back to, again, my favourite talking point, the small business, like that ability to innovate. This productivity roundtable seems to have left out the one thematic which didn't make the cut, innovation. And then they want to try and regulate that too with their AI and all these things. The bottom line is really about this roundtable, which we saw during the week, was a rehash, no new ideas, more regulation. And the simple fact is that critical area, the magic ingredient of any economy, the one that's going to prosper is the one that's going to be more efficient, come up with better innovation, is completely, it's an afterthought. And this idea of energy in terms of, I don't want to be critical of Mr. Bowen, the energy minister at the national level, but I have to be. I mean, this is almost like a crusade in terms of renewables good, anything else in the mix is bad. It's a terrible, terrible headline to continually spit out because it's just not borne out in fact. And, if you look at Australia, I mean, I lived in Hong Kong and, all over, and I mean, it is a very tough place now to extract a dollar. And when the aspiration is, if you look at some of the advocacy groups, is to tax, what do you want to be like France, where, be the top of the scale? We're not competitive and we've got problems and we don't really want to talk about it at a microeconomic level. We have these 11 million homes in the macro thematic. Again, it's the thematic. The hard work at the community level is always the toughest bit. The end.
Yeah. It's just extraordinary to me. I mean, I can't understand how we can put small business down, how we can have no focus on innovation, we can have high energy costs, and we think this is a productivity summit. Matt Canavan, I thought, had a great line on this. He was talking about, we've gone from some of the cheapest energy prices in the world to the highest energy prices in the world, and that is fundamental to sorting out this productivity decline. And he said, you've got, people with economic degrees sitting around this table who've somehow just forgotten how critical low energy prices are to productivity and to economic growth. Grant.
Yeah, well, there's a straight line relationship, I like to say, between energy consumption and civilization. But that same straight line exists with productivity. We only have the society we live in today with all the wealth that we've got, so that, four of us have got time even to sit around a table talking to you, is because we've worked out how to harness the universe to our benefit. And if you increase the cost of that input, it's like increasing the cost of any other input. It decreases your output per unit, and productivity. Someone said to me, I don't think the average punter knows what productivity is. And the government has tried to redefine it as or doing things better or whatever, but it's basically doing more with less.
Yeah.
So if the cost of less goes up, then you're trying to do more, but with more. And that doesn't work.
No. We've got the ACTU in the room talking. I mean, we've talked about the 4-day work week last week. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Only in Australia could you come up with, one way to increase productivity would be to drop to the working hours from 30. It's not about the days, but they're talking about 38 to 30. The hours a week. That's the problem. It doesn't matter how many days you do.
I've got to give my zinger line. The ACTU, have done more for productivity, than what Jack the Ripper did for late night shopping. I mean, it is, these things, these are thought bubbles. They have no, basis in fact. In fact, the union movement have next to zero representation in the private sector, in most industries.
Right.
It's completely absurd.
It is.
They are offering their hot take on,
It's incredible, and they're not a balanced union organisation anyway. You can see they're quite ideologically radical. So the 4-day work week was one thing, but this idea that they start talking about AI and suggesting that the workers should be the ones to determine the rollout of AI in the workplace. Well, technology is not going to to take a back seat to the preferences of Sally McManus and the ACTU.
Well, it
and
might.
the world's not going to either.
It might do, and the world might not either, but countries have managed to do those sorts of things, and that is the recipe for deteriorating living standards with respect to the rest of the world. I mean, one of the things that sort of struck me about the whole thing is, and it been brought back today by the Chinese comments about Taiwan, is that we're living potentially in the shadow of another war. You know, President Xi has said 2027 he wants to have Taiwan taken back. The Americans have basically said, no, you're not. We've got all these bases on Australia. Now, war is basically economies by other means. And if you've got a weak economy, and that's where we're heading, you are vulnerable. And that wasn't any part of the discussion. You know, we're all carrying on as though life is just a series of parties smoking pot on the beach at Byron Bay. And mum and dad will come along and clean up afterwards. As though, you know, what we've got here will just keep itself.
You bloody boomer. You can't talk like that, you boomer. God forbid.
I thought you were going to call me a warmonger.
Bad enough with the avocado and the cafe lattes, mate. Yeah.
Can I just say one thing on the AI? Can you imagine Sam Altman, who, you know, basically led the ChatGPT in the collective consciousness as we now know it? I mean, could you imagine these guys, you know, just looking at this round table going, you know what, they would have shrugged their shoulders and went, Australia.
Yeah.
You know,
just Australia.
Yeah, they would have gone Australia. The Pacific's version of Canada. That's really what they would have said, you know, like this nonsense that, like, you've got these, for a while there, the financial markets thought, you know what, we're going to sort these cryptocurrencies out. Guess what? The world moves on. Technologies, regulation is going to find it very, very tough to keep up.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So productivity and AI, NDIS controls were the other thing. Now, look, the NDIS, something's got to be done about the NDIS because it's just blowing out. We can't have. You know, it would be lovely if we could support everybody all the time for everything, but there has to be a line drawn somewhere with the NDIS or it's going to collapse, right? And they've decided to draw the line around this spike in everybody saying it's, you know, and there is a lot of autism out there. I'm not diminishing that at any point, but the reality is that the NDIS is supposed to be for more serious disability, not moderate disability so much.
So they're removing it from the NDIS spectrum, so to speak.
Yes. They are moving it, though, to a new program that's going to cost $2 billion federally and for which they're going to ask the states for to chip in for a few billion, I think. But any thoughts on how we manage health and disability services moving forward, guys, that in a way that's sustainable, it isn't going to send us broke?
There's a fundamental philosophical problem here in that they think that benefits ought to be universal. Now, Labor is in a better position to deal with these sorts of issues than the coalition. And the history of Australia is that it's Labor that's actually put the brakes on welfare programs in the past. Why should the NDIS be available to everyone, irrespective of income? You know, if Gina Reinhardt had an autistic child, why should she be able to get money off the NDIS? And I'm just taking Gina as an extreme example that the left like to throw in people's faces. So, you know, just means testing it. The whole idea that somehow we're born into life and we get to keep all the goodies and the government underwrites all the baddies and ensures that everyone has exactly the same standard of living is just nonsensical. And people like Paul Keating understood that. They understood that these programs end up eating a whole lot of other things that are required for people who are also unfortunate or fallen off the wagon.
Of course, there's only so much to go around in terms of what we can tax people and you put into the public purse. But people aren't thinking that way. We're not educating Australians to think that way.
Well, the problem is that voters have got used to, and I think this is possibly a COVID effect, the idea that government will step in. If there's anything bad there, they will step in and they'll fix it for you.
Yeah.
You know, they're the ones that ought to be responsible rather than saying, look, can you say shit happens on this program?
You can.
Shit happens. And you want a resilient economy so that people have got their own resources to deal with it.
You also want resilient people, and you don't build resilient people in a resilient by suppressing innovation, by killing small business and people who want to get out and have a go, by making it incredibly difficult for people to have a go, and by creating a general cultural mood of A, victimhood, and B, a sense of oppression by some mean oppressor, when it's not really happening either, to get a little bit philosophical about it for a second. Gene Tunney, your comment on this NDIS situation, or just in terms of our social services?
Well, they certainly need to do something. So it's good in a way that they're addressing it. There are concerns about how they've gone about it. They haven't consulted properly with advocacy groups, with families. So I think there are concerns around that. I've got to declare a conflict of interest here. I'm on the board of a non-profit that advocates for families with children with a developmental delay. And the concerns from the sector are that this has just been announced suddenly. There's been no proper consultation. So I think it's bad in that regard. But look, I mean, credit to the government. They need to address the cost of NDIS. It's been growing at 20% per year, okay? So it's doubling in size in over just a bit over 3 years, okay? And their target is to get it down to 8%, right? Which is still faster than the economy grows about 5% or something in nominal terms. So it's still going to be growing as a share of the budget, as a share of the economy. So even their target for what they'd be happy to get it down to is still too high. So that they really do need to do something. I'm concerned about the way they've got here and how they're going to push all these costs onto the states. So this is about cost shifting to the states. It's about getting children onto what they call foundational supports. And they haven't really dealt the states into it. Graham's point before, we haven't got the state treasurers there. Mookie's there, Daniel Mookie, who seems very good from New South Wales, but he's just one state. They really need to talk to all the states about this.
Somebody on Twitter was saying yesterday that we should really be looking at just cleaning up the rip-offs, the scams, and the way people are taking the mickey out of the NDIS. But do you think there is a lot of that going on?
Yes.
Okay. So if we clean that up, would that bring it down? And not enough? You still have to draw a line.
Well, we're spending 46 to 48 billion this financial year, or something of that magnitude. It's around 50 billion, so $50,000 million on the NDIS. I mean, I've no doubt there's rorting, and it's probably billions of dollars of rorting. But still, the fundamental problem is just the high rate of eligibility, and I mean what Graham's talking about with potentially means testing. I mean, maybe we should be looking at something like that. It's the parameters of the scheme. It's not just rorting. Rorting's part of it, but we're still not going to solve the problem with cracking down on rorting.
Yeah. All right, we'll come back in a moment and we'll talk tax with our roundtable on the roundtable here on the other side. Did you know that with a virtual private network, or VPN, on your computer, tablet or phone, you can log into your favourite streaming services like Netflix from home with an internet address from anywhere in the world and watch all the shows that they offer in other countries, including stuff in different languages? And using a VPN to route all your internet traffic through a third-party server means that big corporations and big government can't spy on you. If you sign up now with private internet access, we think they're the best VPN servers out there, as a viewer of the other side, you can get 83% off the price of your subscription and get online for less than $3 a month. Check it out right now. Go to piavpn.com/other side. That's piavpn.com/other side. It's a great service, a rock bottom price, and supporting our sponsor, you are helping to keep the other side going and growing. The head of Australia's peak union body, the ACTU Secretary, Sally McManus, wants higher property taxes, higher taxes on resources. She wants higher taxes on family trusts. And of course, more tax on what she calls wealthy Australians. And she doesn't think workers will be better off if there's lower taxes, nor does she think there's anything wrong with current levels of government spending, despite the fact that we have government debt across federal and state of around $1.5 million. That's $1.5 trillion. Annual interest on that, by the way, at 5% works out to $75,000 million, or $75 billion. That's about $3,000 for every man, woman and child in the country, and about $6,000 for every taxpayer. That's wasted every year on interest payments, not new government spending, just completely lost. It's interest on debt, on money already spent. And they keep spending more than they're bringing in, so the debt keeps increasing. The young will pay all of this more than the old will, but the young keep voting for the left. Go figure. It's hilarious. Anyway, the final day of the Albanese government's economic summit focused on the question of taxation. And the ACTU says it wants Aussies to pay 25,000 million more in tax every year. And please stop with the, we just want the rich to pay and the corporations to pay. At the end of the day, you want to shift 25 billion a year from the private productive economy to the public consuming economy mainly, by force, and everyone who works is productive is therefore paying, if not directly, then indirectly in everything we buy and do. Sally McManus says, quote, we actually want our healthcare system and our education system properly funded. We actually value all of those things, unquote, as if everybody else doesn't. As if you don't follow her line of thinking and the socialist strategy, you don't care about those things. We all value those things, Sally. I hate to break it to you. The only difference between the left and the right is that the right realise that just giving government more money doesn't mean the services are going to get delivered better. We believe the better way to deliver services to people is in a competitive market, not a monopoly run by a few elite bureaucrats and left-wing politicians who are only accountable to the public once every 3 to 4 years. We think the government could be delivering a hell of a lot more social service for the tax we're already paying if they'd let the private sector do more of the delivery competitively and fund the customers, letting the users choose the best providers. But anyway, that's not how the left thinks. They just want to keep taxing productive Aussies who have to compete to earn a buck in the real world, force them to hand over half their earnings in tax, and then distribute it to the people that they like to run all the services in a monopolised government system. I'm simplifying and exaggerating and generalising, but that's basically what it is. And that's called socialism. And Sally probably missed the 20th century where we learned quite clearly it doesn't work. So, the final day of the Albanese Economic Roundtable thingy, or the Chalmers Economic Roundtable thingy, Albo or Jimbo, take your pick. It focused on taxation. We've got our own roundtable on the roundtable here on the other side. I'm joined by our regulars, head of the Australian Institute for Progress think tank, Graham Young, former Bloomberg editor and data analyst, Dan Petrie, and economist GENE TUNNY. Gentlemen, can we pay any more tax? I'll start with you this time, Gene. 25 billion more, Sally McManus wants us to pay. Can we afford it?
It's a choice we have to make. I mean, my choice is no, and I think it'd be bad for our productivity, our efficiency. It'd dull incentives to work, incentives to save and invest. So I'm certainly not for it. Can we actually pay more tax? I mean, sure, there are countries that have higher tax burdens than Australia. There's no doubt about that they could actually increase taxation, but I don't think that's desirable from an economic or an equity perspective, because I mean we're basically, if you look at us, how most of the tax is disproportionately levied on a small section of the population, and the private sector tends to bear a lot of it. And I mean, small business people are really just being ground down by the heavy taxation burden. So as a business person myself, I'm certainly not in favour of more tax. I'd like to see cuts to tax rates and really incentivise that entrepreneurship and work effort.
Okay, Graham?
Yeah, we can obviously pay more tax. Should we pay more tax? That's the question. But we're going to be forced to pay more tax because government spending, as federal government spending, is in the papers given to the roundtable going to hit 27% of GDP. Now, I remember back to the 70s when it was 17% of GDP, and shock horror, Gough Whitlam nudged it up by about 3 percentage points. I think we got to about 22, and then it stayed there for 40 or so years.
So 27% of GDP, and that's just federal government spending.
That's just federal government spending. I think someone quoted 39% as being total government spending in the country, which is getting scarily close to 50%. So the government has to get its spending under control. That's sort of number one, so that you can sort the tax situation out. There's a myth that we're a low tax country. We're not. We're in the middle for the OECD, depending how you deal with the superannuation. So a lot of the OECD countries, they charge a social security welfare insurance, which is part of your taxation. We basically have ours as a privatised sort of system where we have 12.5% effectively taken out of our pay by the boss and invested somewhere. that actually shows you what productivity can do, because the OECD countries that have these insurance policies, basically it's kind of unfunded. They're going to go broke, whereas here we're complaining that people have got too much money in their social security accounts. Because when you're managing it yourself and when you're letting the private sector manage it, you actually do a better job than just letting the government. And, that's a good example. So that's a sort of tax situation which is to our benefit. But when you compare us to other countries in the OECD, the only area where we're kind of out of whack is indirect taxation. So the only room, if they want to be competitive, for them to really change anything much is with indirect tax. And I think that's why you saw them playing around, although they ran away from it, with a carbon tax. Because if you think about it, it's a GST, but specific to things that emit CO2. They could have played around with tariffs, and they didn't. And
well, I'm looking at the 10 things, and then the other 10 immediate things that Jim Chalmers spoke about in his media statement after his speech after the roundtable. And I can't see anything concrete there that we can talk about in terms of tax policy. But the Council of Small Business Organisations Australia Chairman Matthew Addison was reported as having said that in the meeting when they were talking about tax, many people, including the business groups, suggested reforms to the GST could be considered. No doubt putting up the GST to something like 15% or 12.5% or something. Why would that be a good idea or not, Dan, do you think?
Well, it's the only way. You have to drag down the income tax, the corporate tax burden. I mean, the idea, really, if you were to say to Australians, do you know what, you spend the first 4 months of the year paying tax? They go, what? Yeah, you do. 4 months of the year. And so the reality is we're not competitive. That's the truth of it. And eventually you start to get a trickle. People look offshore and that's it.
Can I just say, I think we spend the first 6 months of the year. I mean, if you look at our taxation levels, what they are as income tax, but then you add all of the taxes that we pay in terms of, all the after-tax tax, like you can't even drive down the road.
No.
You're paying for that. You're paying for everything on top of everything again.
Do you know what, tax in this country...
It's got to be above 50%.
As a topic, tax in this country, reform of the taxation system in this country should be lumped in with the very fast train proposal.
It's never going to happen.
And it's just, I mean... And it's so sad because the truth of the matter is, that we talk about getting the country going on the innovation side, but if you're a small business again starting out, you are smashed when you in terms of you have to get an accountant, you have to set up company structures, you have to sink all this capital before you can even turn a dollar. You then have to pay very high input prices. You then have to deal with an industrial relations framework which says, like, I want to employ Mary Jo on Sunday, and the idea of serving cappuccinos at $42 an hour. I mean, you start to get into this realm where going, well, why should I pay $42 an hour? Because her income tax is incredibly high. Whereas if we would actually have a very honest conversation about it, that the impost on the person risking their own capital, if the headline rate's 27%, you can go offshore and you can start a business where the headline rate is a lot lower.
I've had a number of people tell me they want to go offshore lately.
Well, and I mean, but when people start mumbling about it, it starts reflecting in other areas where capital goes to flight. That's all.
Yeah. So GST, Gene, do you think that they will touch GST or that won't be in the mix?
They won't touch GST. They see the proposed changes to GST as regressive. I think Albanese would push back on that.
Inflationary, probably, right?
Well, there'll be an initial hit to prices, and that'll be picked up in CPI, but the RBA will look through it. I mean, that happened in 2000 when we introduced GST. But look, I don't think they'll do it. It just creates so much political pain for them, particularly if you wanted to bring in fresh food and education and health. Could you imagine the political risks?
What's more likely, though, raising the company tax, which of course we all pay. I mean, people
for the big companies.
Yeah. Yes. So and having this two double taxation or something, companies with a turnover of more than $1 billion will pay more. What do you think of that?
I like the idea of a cash flow tax, but I think it should be across the board. I'm not a great fan of having this hybrid system. This it's really clumsy. Judith Sloan just shredded it in the Australian a few weeks ago. the PC were constrained by the fact that it had to be revenue neutral, that the government basically told them, look, we don't want to lose money on this, so you've got to, if you want to cut tax on small business or smaller companies, then you need to make it up somehow. So they introduce this additional cash flow tax. So I'd be worried about introducing a new tax while you've still got an old tax. I think it's a risk in terms of they could potentially just have more tax in the future. So I'd like them to come up with a proper company tax system, maybe based on a cash flow tax, rather than have this hybrid system that they've developed.
Is there any case for suggesting that lowering tax might actually, Laffer curve theory sort of stuff? But I mean, is it possible that lowering tax could actually help?
You want to lower tax at least on investment activities, and companies exist for only one purpose: to do business.
So to be clear, that taxing wealth, when we tax wealth,
that's right.
We're taxing investment activity.
That's right. Yeah, there's a view on the left that people are like Scrooge McDuck, and when they get wealthy, they just put it in a barn somewhere, and then on Sundays they go and look at it.
Yeah, that's basically how most Aussies think.
That's not how it works.
Sorry,
it actually gets invested into businesses in some way, shape, or form that can pay a return, and it seeks the highest return. Australia has got a hollowed out economy. Really we're very good at producing mineral wealth. That mineral wealth, particularly the iron ore, is at the top of a cycle, and there's every chance it's going to disappear, which is going to make the tax funding position perilous. So we need other things in there. We're good at health, at medical innovation. But why would you come here and set up a health company that, your hope's going to be what they call a unicorn, listed $1 billion, with our capital gains tax potentially going up rather than down? You want to encourage that sort of activity.
I can't see why anybody would want to invest here at the moment. I really can't. It's just
and
disturbing.
If they don't,
I love this. The Grattan Institute chief executive, Aruna Santanapali, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but in her presentation of the roundtable, she pushed for tax changes to the wealthy and retirees to fix intergenerational inequity, suggesting a dual income tax system where wages are taxed differently from capital. She said a higher GST could help states phase out inefficient taxes, and said a land tax would be worthwhile. I mean, there were hardly any experts on taxation in that tax discussion that had a sort of liberal or classical liberal or free market perspective on anything. We are running out of time, guys, so quick 30-second wrap up from each of you. Dan, any thoughts on?
Well, I thought it was a waste of time, and eventually, if you don't reform, if you stand in the middle of the road, eventually you get run over. That was what Thatcher said.
Yeah.
That's where we're at the moment. It's an incredibly uninspiring roundtable full, sadly, of the same characters.
Graham?
We've got a government with no direction, which I think contradicts Paul Kelly's position that they'll be empowered at 2030, because if you don't have direction, you don't have momentum, and if you don't have momentum, then you're vulnerable.
So even with the majority of 93 seats in the House, in the lower house, you think they could lose the next election?
They could.
Yep.
Not predicting it, but they could.
Thank you, Graham. Gene?
There was one thing we didn't mention, which is the fact that at least they've seen the light on the need to reduce regulation on new projects. They've come to it through the need to have more renewables, which is not necessarily what we need at the moment. We need to have a balanced approach to new energy. But they've been inspired by that Ezra Klein book, Abundance, in the US, which is very popular in progressive circles. So they've come to it from not the same way I would have come to it, but I think it's good that they're focused on removing regulation. But we've heard talk about reducing red tape and green tape, et cetera, before. We have to see how that all plays out. So that's a tick. I want to see how Chalmers develops this tax package. Is it going to be a big reform? Is he going to try to position himself to be PM? And is he going to really try and do some radical things there? That's what I think is going to be really interesting over the coming years.
It's going to be an interesting thing to watch in the next sort of 2 or 3 months to see the aftermath of the roundtable and what plays out and comes out of it. So anyway, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you giving up your time for us this week, and we look forward to seeing you all again on the show in the future.
Thanks, Damien.
Thanks.
And that's all for this episode of The Other Side, your analysis of the best news and commentary without the woke. We will see you next Friday night, and clips from this show will be dropping throughout the week as usual on our YouTube and Rumble channels. If you like what you see, please do support us. We are a voluntarily viewer-supported show. There are now 2 ways to support us financially. One's to go to our website at othersidetv.com.au and sign up to the exclusive side. You can do that for less than $5 a month. Or you can now subscribe right on YouTube, if that's where you normally watch, by simply pressing the join button beside the subscribe button down below. It's that easy. The QR code at the bottom of the screen will also take you to our website to sign up, which you can do for free, by the way. It's good to just be on our mailing list so you know when the show's coming out. And we really would appreciate that support as well. But I have got to put it out there that we are in a pretty desperate situation. We do need your support to continue into 2026. And we really need to see an uptick in the number of people who watch the show actually chipping in a couple of bucks every month to support it. Otherwise, we're probably not going to be able to continue, to be honest. So please do dig deep if you can and help us keep on going. I'm Damien Coury. Bye for now.
The Other Side with Damien Coury is Australia's best independent news commentary show, bringing you up to speed on the issues that matter most. Simply subscribe for free on YouTube by hitting the subscribe button and bell, so you'll be notified whenever we post anything. And to really stay in touch, check out our independent website at othersidetv.com.au. You can sign up for free there too, or join the exclusive side and help support our show for less than $5 a month.